to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Dr. Joseph Place. He's been back and forth and doing a lot of work out of Ukraine. He's got two publications, and he'll tell us all about them. And he is also a NAFA member and the podcast co-founder. We'll be discussing with him what all of this means. We'll be talking about Russian information campaigns and how they're evolving, and we'll be talking about the future of information warfare and the war in Ukraine and Russia's efforts to bring down the Western civilization and what the Trump presidency, the second term, means in terms of all of these developments. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get into the meat of the discussion, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you ended up in Ukraine, what what is NEFA, how you joined it, and just everything to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, you did quite a good summary, but yeah. So I'm Joseph Place, Joe Place. I go by different names sometimes, depending where you find me on the internet. I've been, I moved to Ukraine in 2019 because I got married to a Ukrainian, and at that time it was easier to move there than it was to go to the UK, even though I was doing my PhD in England at that time. Then COVID happened and everything, and it just became my home in a way. But I also, because I had this background doing academic stuff, I was doing a PhD in politics. I was getting more into Ukrainian politics at that level. I was always fascinated with it because from, well, 2014, the events of Euromaidan, that was the point where I was paying a bit more attention. But, I was inspired by what I saw even in 2006 and, the Orange Revolution. That was I was like 14 years old at the time. So that was quite inspiring to me. But yeah, so in the last few years, well, actually, no, both publications have been this year, my academic publications on Ukraine. One was about the language policies there, because obviously Ukraine is a very linguistically diverse country, and this is also a big propaganda attack you hear from Russians, but also Hungarians. So we were looking at the Hungarian minority, especially in policies there, about the minority languages and how they can access services, and can we call this a liberal policy? What improvements can we make? And the more recent publication, which only came out 2 weeks ago now, is about the economic situation in Ukraine. So about the economic policies, because there's been a lot of like marketization in various areas, cuts to various things. And, we're discussing some of the challenges that this might bring, especially even post-war, to Ukraine's development. And an overview of the history of the economic policies, entrepreneurship, business ownership in Ukraine, because actually it has quite a rich tradition. So we were just looking at this from a historical point of view, looking at like some of the theoretical and practical challenges that Ukraine faces, and considering the future. So, a lot of people talk about Ukraine mostly about the war context, but there's so much more there. And I think that's just so important to explore academically as journalists. And I think this is just something I really enjoy doing. And I get to bring in my philosophical background because I do a lot of political theory stuff. So about, what kind of society do we want? How do we provide the conditions so people can pursue their life? And, these sorts of policies are really important. So that's something that really interests me. But obviously, you can't be interested in Ukraine without coming across disinformation, right? So I remember even from Maidan, all the claims about Nazis, all this stuff then, and seeing how that's grown was quite depressing. And obviously, when the full-scale invasion happened in 2022, I was on social media, and it was very disparaging seeing people talk about a country that some of them had barely heard of. And I'd lived there; it was my home. I had connections. My wife's from there. And when I saw people challenging this disinformation on Twitter, especially, which eventually became NAFO, I knew immediately I wanted to become part of this movement. I joined about May, I think, 2022. I started with about 6 followers on Twitter. Now I have about 15,000. So it's sort of thanks to NAFO in a way. Um, and then it was around that summer 2022 when I met Matt, my co-host, and he came to me and he basically said, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast? Because there's actually quite a lot of academics, journalists, researchers, activists who are connected to NAFO or sympathetic, and maybe we can talk to some of them." And yeah, and then that sort of snowballed from there. So we've talked to people who are in politics, such as like Paul Massaro. We've talked to academics, we've talked to journalists, we just talked to some regular people. I had an episode about Ukraine's like the life in Zakarpattia, where there's a big Hungarian minority. We talked to Sean Pinner, the soldier who was captured. He's not really a normal person, but okay, because he's quite known. But we had an episode about Moldova recently because we've sort of, our scope is everything to do with Russia and disinformation. So it's a bit of a broad spectrum of connected issues. But yeah, we tried to talk to normal people as well as experts to just help people understand a little bit on a deeper level the reality of the issues that anyone who supports a democratic society should be interested in.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Let's talk a little bit about what NAFO isn't and isn't, because there's been a lot of controversy about it here in certain circles. On the one hand, you have a lot of online social media activist supporters. Of course, on the other hand, you have stereotypes about it and even quite a bit of derision, especially from the more MAGA-oriented elements of society, but not just them.
Yeah, so NAFO NAFO is fundamentally a decentralized network of people of all different political backgrounds, of all different levels of connections, expertise. You have just average middle-aged mums on the computer. You have people like me with a bit of an academic background. You've had people who've become personalities, in the information space online. You've got soldiers, you've got all sorts of people who have become affiliated or part of NAFO. I think that, it's not directed, it's not organized, it organizes itself in many ways. Now, as it's grown, it has changed. There have been internal arguments, there have been issues, of course there have been, because you have hundreds of thousands of people at this point. And yeah, some people, of course, like pro-Russian people don't like it for obvious reasons because it's organized around the defense of Ukraine. But at the same time, there are some people don't like it because they think you should be going above this. Ukraine, NATO mocked, it doesn't engage in serious debate because that failed for years. You can't argue against disinformation. You can't argue against these people with facts a lot of the time. Now, I like to try to do a combined approach of using real world facts and educating other people to then challenge it. But, using memes, using jokes, I think is way more effective because it really, these people don't like it and it makes them look silly. And that's why it works so well. But yeah, there are certain issues within NAFO, like there are in any disorganized movement, because there is no central philosophy apart from defending Ukraine. So you're going to have different groups, different people. Yeah, that's all I can say. But I still think it has been one of the most effective anti-disinformation campaigns we've really ever seen, and I think we'll get into this later. But it does offer some important lessons that everyone should learn about how to fight disinformation, how it's not best when it's a top-down approach. It's much more effective when it's a grassroots approach.
No, that is definitely I want to explore, something I want to explore. But for now, I want to kind of also get some more info for people who don't know much about it and who have heard misinformation and disinformation. First of all, what does NAFO actually stand for? And second, you did mention that it sort of evolved itself, but there has to be some sort of a beginning, early founding members and such, and the basic founding principles and concept before it turned into this massive movement.
Yeah. Okay. So it started with one guy made himself a little avatar with this dog online, the Shiba Inu dog.
Doge dog.
And yeah, so like the Cheems, like the Slav Cheems, he made himself that, and someone said, "I want one of them." And in return for that, he did a donation to the Georgian Legion. He asked him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it really grew. And, to start with, it was a lot of people who were either military affiliated or in the OSINT sphere, YouTubers, online people who were sort of pro-Ukraine. But it really escalated fast into within the pro-Ukraine space. So they called him a fella, like the little dog, a fella. And then NAFO means North Atlantic Fella Organization, like NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So obviously, so and it just became a joke, and it just really escalated very fast. And I think people really liked how the dog looked. It cute. Everyone wanted one. And it just really rapidly grew. And to start with, it was all about just raising funds for the Legion. And then because all these people were pro-Ukraine and they could identify each other, they would help each other fight disinformation online. So, they see people like Medvedev posting stuff, or all these like influencers, I suppose you call them, Twitter people posting disinformation about Ukraine, and lots of people would just come together and just post and fight against it. And this was a way to feel like you're doing something. So that from the beginning there was two main. The main thing was raising money. Then it was about combating disinformation, and to this day this continues. Fundraising is one of the core things. It's definitely grown to loads of different fundraisers. I don't know how much money they've made, but a lot. And challenging disinformation online, mocking people, making memes, making jokes. That's just been the way of doing it, and it has been mostly confined to Twitter, or now X. I still don't want to call it that. And but there are people in NAFO on other platforms as well. A lot have gone to Blue Sky, I'm on both. Some people have tried to do things on TikTok. Some people have tried to do things on Instagram and Facebook. But yeah, because there's so many personalities on Twitter still, the most of the anti-disinformation work happens there. So yeah, NAFO started with this very small incident, and its focus is just mocking Russian disinformation online. Although there has included like other areas of conflict that are related, stuff about Georgia, stuff about like Syria more recently, and obviously a lot happened in the US election because of just the pro-Russian rhetoric or anti-Ukraine rhetoric that surfaced, especially among the MAGA crowd. But yeah, it's got quite a wide scope at this point, and everyone has their own personal battle they fight.
That's funny. So what does it take to be a NAFO member, and how do you weed out the people who are double agents, so to speak, who are deliberately
Mm.
trying to sabotage? I'm sure there's quite a number, and people who are not necessarily, foreign agents, but who are just simply not constructive, or giving a bad name to the movement.
Yeah, so anyone can join by generally giving a donation. That was the original rule. Although some people would make their own, some people got gifted like little dogs. The original idea, you donated, you said to someone, "Hey, I want a dog that's dressed like this." You chose what you want, and then you were in it, and you showed your proof of donation. Some people, yes, they made their own if they had good Photoshop skills and stuff like that. That wasn't a problem. But yeah, you mentioned that this is where it was easy for abuse. You got people stealing other people's. You got people pretending to be pro-Ukraine or just wanting to cause chaos. It does happen. So one of the main things this is regulated by people usually just noticing suspicious tweets, and it is usually shared like, "Hey, I think this guy's a fake fella," as they're called. And generally people will then block them or unfollow them or things like this. And it kind of self-regulates to an extent. It's quite impressive. You see something without much coordination, just self-regulate itself in circles. So it's quite impressive. That being said, there are some people that perhaps they get an ego. I've got so many followers, I'm so important. That happens, and that can cause like little like friction, some friction for a while. But it is pretty good at regulating itself. Some people have issues with, say, people on the far right who have tried to join or stuff like this because of some of their views not really aligning. Of course, it's very open to different political perspectives, but when people are promoting things like actual like racism or pro far right stuff, which is at odds with those of many of us who want to support Ukraine as a democratic country. We tend to sort of shun them sometimes quite directly, sometimes just quietly, and they kind of just disappear over time. The other aspect is when we started, it was very much, oh, follow everyone back who's got a dog picture, the fella. But after a lot of time, and I've been very big at advocating, it's like, check their accounts, check what they're actually saying, because people do pretend there can be scammers. So you have to have quite a strong level of internet savviness in a way when it comes to this. I've seen people being taken advantage of it, and that's not about the pro-Ukraine space. That's just about the internet, unfortunately. You just have to be careful. And some of us, like myself, I've tried to create threads on educating people like what signs to look out for and how to be aware of scams. But so, we sort of putting in an input and people try to take that, and then it helps with the self-regulation. I'm by far the only person. I'm not taking any credit for this. Lots of people have done a lot more work on vetting and pointing out fake fellas and bad actors. But it is a part of an organic wide process. Really, it's completely decentralized, and because it's decentralized, there is space for this abuse, unfortunately. But it's self-regulating, so it's like the strengths and the weaknesses is what I always say.
So, speaking of strengths and weaknesses, what has been the impact of NATO? How can you even measure it? And is there any sort of goal? I mean, let's say the Russian forces withdraw from Ukraine
Mm.
completely and also withdraw from Georgia and everywhere else. Will that be the end of NATO? Or is there something greater to this cause?
Yeah. Okay. So to start is the goal at the moment is primarily helping Ukraine. It's primarily helping fundraising, challenging disinformation. The impact has been when we've had people on Russian propaganda like TV, when we've had major politicians, attack NATO. That shows we are no longer in the defensive. They are on the defensive, and that completely changed everything, in my opinion. And I do think it has changed the information space forever. Now it has changed a little bit because Elon Musk take over of Twitter made the algorithm less favorable, but still, NAFO's presence on disinformation, nonsense as we like to call it, on Twitter is really still quite very strong, and it's still very noticeable. And this really has changed the dynamic of completely unchecked propaganda. It is harder now, I would say, because of the algorithm, as I said, but I still think the impact has I've never seen anything like this, and the impact of having these people refer to us and come to us, having US politicians talk about us and try to spread rumors, that shows that we've made an impact. Because if we didn't, then no one would care. And also, we've been in media. We've had people like, various politicians in EU and NATO join us, Ukrainian politicians. That's been a significant step. We've had coverage at this point. Now, then the next measuring impact is quite hard. It's more of a qualitative thing, I would say, in many ways. But there is a quantitative aspect in that. There is a lot of money raised for different things. We have fundraised countless drones, vehicles. We had artillery. It's actually quite wild. We've helped U-24 a lot, and they raise a lot of money for the Ukrainian army. So yeah, there is a significant impact. Now, and the last question you said, what would happen if the war ended tomorrow and Ukraine had total victory? I think some people would leave. Yes, I know some people have said that. I think some people would probably maybe take down the little like dog. Maybe they would go back to being normal, but maybe they would stay active on Twitter. I do think it has built networks though. And I think a lot of these networks are rooted in a shared principle of a belief in like democracy, in certain rights, certain freedoms. And I think there's going to be new fights. First of all, Russia still won't go away, I don't believe, and I don't think the Putinists and whoever else are going to be going anywhere. There might be different conflicts. I think we've also got issues about the far right, especially right now. We have other dictators. I think many of us will continue to try to challenge disinformation around these issues online. Whether all united under the same NATO banner, that's a good question. I don't even know. I think some of us will definitely continue it, though. I think many of us will. or maybe just call ourselves like former NAFO or NAFO affiliated or something like this. I don't think it would end immediately. I think many of us have found, a nice online purpose and community through NAFO. So yeah, I think though it will continue. It might be smaller, it might change, but I think it will continue in some form.
Interesting. So, Russia inadvertently created, a possibly permanent, entrenched opposition to the thing that they have done best, for over 100
Yeah,
years now.
yeah. I mean, I think also one of the interesting things about this is that yeah, they've created something and they've given lessons, as I said, to how to combat disinformation. Because, we had stuff like the EU versus disinformation. It's all very dry, it's all very serious. NAFO shows that it's much better, grassroots, funny, don't take yourself too seriously, and it's way more effective. And so even if NAFO did go away, those lessons have been learned at some level. And I think that's why there will be a continuing impact. And I think there will be people like myself who try to continue in some way. Yeah.
I think you touched on something important, which is the disruptive element of countering propaganda and disinformation. Whether you use it through humor or some other means, that disruption, that forced, jumping out of the framework that the other side is trying to implement. I think it's a key element, and I think part of the reason these official institutions have been failing, and they are absolutely failing, is because they don't know how to disrupt the
Yeah.
other operation. And the question is, has there been any effort to formally collaborate with the official institutions and figure out a way how to spice up their game? Because to be honest with you, it's rather uninspiring when you, or rather me, goes to NATO conference on strategic communication time after time and sees things actually getting worse, not better, and over time countries in Europe being lost because of the inability of these official actors to disrupt the narratives that are being spouted.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of official collaboration, I think the closest thing was when there was the NATO summit in Vilnius the same time as the NATO summit. And I suppose there are some politicians who are in NATO, but there's never been any official collaboration, as far as I'm aware, beyond United 24, sorry, so that with Ukrainian government, but not with NATO or anything like this. So United 24, for anyone who doesn't know, does a lot of fundraising for Ukraine. I realize I should probably clarify that. Um, Now, in a way, the challenge is if NATO said, "Hey, I don't know, to some people in NATO, do you want to work for us or do you want to become part of us?" I think it would lose its appeal because, first of all, it would probably be managed and coordinated, and it would lose some of its strength. And second, you lose an air of credibility because the credibility comes from being just regular people. I think if they saw it was government affiliated, people would be like, oh, well, of course you're going to say that. You're just part of NATO. I think the fact it's quite a grassroots campaign of people of so many different like worldviews, nationalities, religions, whatever, it would struggle to succeed. What I think institutions could do that they should look at the approach of humor, of appealing to emotions, of appealing to this rather than just dry facts. Of course, facts are crucial. I'm an academic, I value facts. It's very important to me. But you have to, in the information space, it's a war effectively, and you have to appeal to emotions. And humor is a way of mocking people and taking away their authority, and that's why it's important. So I think institutions should look at this and see how we can do this. And so, I don't know, this could be using information farms instead of disinformation farms, encouraging movements without actually directly like making them, trying to use humor, having more of a savvy social online presence as well, and of course, educating people on using social media would be a very good start as well. I should probably start in schools. There's a lot to be done here, and I think NAFO should teach people that humor and appealing to emotions and having a decentralized wide network is much better than a coordinated top down. And I think institutions could leverage that in some way. Yeah, that's the only way I can see a positive collaboration. But I don't believe NAFO itself or any other future organization should ever be official because then it would it would lose its legitimacy.
Yeah, understand that. At the very least, though, there could be some behind the scenes consultations or advice on the methods because, although I have to say, if you have to teach somebody humor, that's often.
Yeah, not a good sign. No, no. And this has been a bit of I've noticed, especially from Britain, a lot of academics don't like NAFO because they're very much like serious. They're very much of the view that everything should be serious and written and you know sincere. Whereas, and you should have decorum. Whereas, I think some academics and journalists from other countries are a bit more open to NAFO's methods. Let's say, you know, and I do think I wonder if there's a generational difference as well sometimes, and that a lot of these institutions are run by people who didn't grow up on the internet in the same way as I did, and we're a bit more savvy. And maybe if people like us join these institutions, we might see a better approach maybe one day. Maybe that's also part of the problem. I'm not sure.
I find it almost surprising because while, yeah, there's certainly a lot of elitist, formal institutions in the UK, it's also well known for its very wry sense of humor and,
Yeah,
fake comics and, Mr. Bean alone is an international celebrity, almost an
right.
iconic character in itself. So I'm just kind of those elements certainly exist in the British society and British cultural institutions. Clearly, they are, part of the um, social structure. So I think it is certainly possible to kind of integrate them. I just don't know whether academia is the best place for doing that, but that doesn't mean that academia should be, should be doing it. If I'm talking about the information institutions,
Yeah,
we should be using both the academic and non-academic approaches as a mix of
yeah.
tools to to address the problem. So I don't necessarily see those things as in conflict.
No,
And sometimes and sometimes it's good for certain types of people to keep their distance from informal things, plausible deniability and all that.
yeah.
But sometimes it's kind of good to see kind of a balance, and I wonder if there isn't a different space where this could be utilized, not specifically the kind of, formal official, ministries and such, but behind the scenes, kind of, um, almost imperceptible, um,
So like informal guidance, so to speak,
formal
sort of.
guidance. Exactly, that's a
Um,
great way of putting it.
yeah, I think there has been a public impact, which I think certain institutions should have noticed, or if they haven't, they should have. I definitely think you see certain people within certain institutions who are, yeah, either in NAFO or even if it's anonymously, they are paying attention to it. I know some people who, they say I can't post like that because of my job, but I support what you're doing, blah blah blah. So
That
you
posted to
do
the
get,
second account.
yeah, and people I'm sure do that. I do believe there must be there needs to be more of this. We do see, but I've not seen it in the institutions to the level I would like yet in terms of the output. I suppose one body would be the US Helsinki group. They do a lot more like emotive, like memes and not memes, but like posts. But that's Paul Massaro's thing, so I'm not entirely surprised about that. I mean, it's not his thing, but he's like one of the he's involved in the he's a NAFO member. He's a part of the Helsinki Institute, so I'm not surprised he's doing that. Other people as well. I think we will see perhaps some social media presences at least be a little bit more combative. But I've just not seen it at the level I've liked yet. I'm worried that because of the nature of these institutions, it will come maybe a bit too late because they can be a bit slow.
I noticed, by the way, that in the US, although it's generally far less formal than the United Kingdom, there's also far less openness, or at least there's a huge divide between the NAFO types and everybody else. It's not nearly as mainstreamed. Um, of course, there's also a bigger population, but there isn't a big reach to the common man. It's almost has become an elitist or semi-quasi-elitist trend that's limited to urban, socially liberal areas and some very elite certain Republican activists and of a particular brand. It hasn't had the sort of very generalized and unifying reach that actually brings people together here. It almost exacerbated or underscored the polarization that's taking place politically. And I'm curious what could be done to kind of reorient that, because I think we could use a lot of more unifying sort of humor and exposure of authoritarianism that I think is missing from the narratives here.
Yeah, like I noticed, for example, in the run up to election, there are a lot of people who are in NATO who are like former Republicans and things like this who are trying their best to, reach out and say like, look, the Republican Party is not the one you used to vote for. It's not this.
Yeah,
This is
I don't know.
dangerous.
That's very
I,
helpful, to be honest.
no, it wasn't helpful for the Democrats because I think the Democrats probably appealed too much to that and lost its own base, and that's probably why
And
they
it was
lost.
not
But
helpful to the Republicans who wanted to do the right thing because it created alienation. They were being kind of derided instead of being able to integrate those approaches and be more effective at being the voices within their own party. That's another point.
I think this is the problem, though, that which mirrors America's own political problem, and it's not just America's, the US, I should
Hmm.
say, really. We see the same thing now in Europe, in that let's say the center left, but also maybe the center right, are struggling to talk to the people that are being swayed to vote for like these far right parties, voting for Trump in the US, who vote for Brexit, because they don't seem to offer anything to them, and that is something I do see as a problem. And so it's of course there were some people who were just bigots and racists who are going to vote for these parties. Okay, whatever. Let's put them aside.
Sure.
But there's a lot of people who are voting because they just feel powerless. They feel they haven't got a voice, and people at least like Trump, like the AfD, even though they blame immigrants and whatever, they are at least going to these people like, yeah, we understand you feel weak, you feel poor, things aren't good for you, inflation is hard, you can't get an apartment, you can't get a you're worried about your kids, whatever. They're talking to those material conditions, and I think that is a problem here that we see. And with regards, trying to reach out to these people politically, that's what these groups need to do. And on the other hand, and groups such as coming back to the NAFO question, how do we reach out to those people? Well, I don't know. Twitter tends to gravitate towards these sort of people. The unfortunately, it seems like the right wing people you do see on Twitter are like absolutely unhinged and just like fascistic now, especially. I don't really know. I don't see these reasonable conservatives anymore because these rural people, they don't seem to be as online. I don't know where they are as much, and they don't seem as engaged. To reach out to these people, yeah, we have to use humor, but we also have to talk to their issues. We shouldn't like degrade everyone who's ever considered voting Republican or whatever, because yeah, it's just going to push them away, even though it might pain us to do it, because I have very little in common with these people. I'll admit I'm a very liberal person from the UK. I travel the world. I'm not I'm not going to find much in common with them in many ways. But there are certain shared values I think most reasonable people will have, and we have to find that unity. And that is something with it for NATO, that is something for institutions, that is something for governments, And I do think we've lost that. The problem is, though, the disinformation world that's exacerbated by Russia, but also these like tech oligarchs and whatever you want to call them, like Elon Musk, they are corroding that sense of shared political culture, that sense of trust, that sense of trust in the process, trust in the systems. Disinformation is exacerbating that. And now we've got AI in the mix, and AI is making that worse as well because it's speeding it along. So we've got a challenge ahead of us, like everyone. NAFO is an example of this. It's a microcosm, I think, of that challenge. And it's the same for institutions, for like let's say, the many political parties in the West. It's this challenge. We need to speak to these people and rebuild that sense of common values, really, I think, rather than pushing them away.
What would be the space for doing so? And given the fact that you mentioned the tech oligarchs, and that brings me to the question I wanted to ask you: asked, where are the reasonable people? Well, they're not being boosted by Elon Musk. who is
No.
being boosted by Elon Musk, the unreasonable people of all backgrounds, but especially, of course, pro-Russian and fascist voices. So if, the reasonable voices are being silent and are virtually invisible. Some of them are banned, some of them voluntarily left, some of them are there, but you don't see them because Elon Musk doesn't want you to see them. What is the question to overcoming this active manipulation of discourse, which is far from free speech? This is
Yeah.
literally an active manipulation. And I'm not saying that what happened previously was any better, but it was also a type of manipulation, and it was part of the same people. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Elon Musk does not represent a radical difference from previous approach. He literally represents a continuity of the process, because if
Yeah.
you what we've learned about the purchase of Twitter is that it was literally a collusion of interest between some of its founders.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people think everything was fine. Like, Jack Dorsey came out and he endorsed Trump. We've seen this stuff, right? Um, the challenge to overcoming this it's a significant one, and I'm worried that it's getting harder and harder. Many people have just decided, we should jump ship, leave Twitter, accept it's gone. And the less we go there, the less we can be manipulated. I understand this point, but I'm worried that this just it still allows this sort of toxic unreasonableness, let's say, fascism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, whatever, all this stuff just festers. And it's got a wider reach than, say, 4chan or 8chan, these other places where, like, we typically see more extremist political behavior. I'm worried that no one took it seriously enough. What we need to do is really the institutions like the EU should actually be doing something. There should be some rules. It is a public square. These are public squares at this point. Yes, they are private businesses, but we do not see an equal playing field. And when we are seeing people being elevated who have very dubious interests, obviously we can't say we should ban everyone. That would be a very illiberal approach I do not support. But I think there's nothing wrong with having some regulations about, like, fairness of representation of views or things like that, which are in accordance with democratic principles many countries have. I think we could demand that. And the other thing is, we need to really educate people in our countries on how to use social media, honestly, especially the older generations. We need to also ultimately encourage people like NAFO to continue to fight this nonsense and really coordinate and do something on a grassroots level as well. I think it's a multi-level approach, and it starts with taking it seriously, because a lot of us are going, oh, it's bad. What you just said is true. It's a continuation of a process which is embedded in our modern internet system, right? We're in Web 0.20, which is dominated by large companies who own little, like, ecosystems, so Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and they control everything. They make the profits from the ads. The ad model is a big part of this, because incendiary tweets or videos on YouTube or whatever, even if people are watching it or retweeting it out of anger, that gets engagement and that increased profit. This is a problem we might need to look at. We need to look at the ad model for the internet. We haven't realized the fundamental connection here between our contemporary. I don't want to say necessarily capitalism, because I think it is, but it doesn't have to be. I don't want, like, a government-run internet either, but I do think there is a connection here with the profit model to the rise of disinformation.
Mhm.
And this is something we also need to look at. And we also need to generally look at the power of these people who are running things like Elon Musk and things like that. They have so much power. The power of CEOs over these public squares is probably something that could be justifiably limited in accordance with democratic principles, because when an individual effectively can influence what other people can do and share, they're in a dominative position. That, I think, is something problematic we should consider challenging. That is something that is very hard for the average person to do, but it's something we need to at least enter into conversation. And as otherwise, we're just going to just keep seeing the same mistakes. Okay, imagine Elon Musk goes, who's next? That's not going to change the problem fundamentally. It's a systemic problem. It's not just one person. It's very easy. It's like going, oh, it's just Trump. No. We have a systemic problem here. It's never just one person. These people exist within a society. They've got this way because of the rules about billionaires, because of the profits they make, the networks we have of these very dubious people. It's a systemic challenge here, and we have to take it seriously as such. We can't just tweak around the edges. It is a problem. I don't have the most concrete answer because it's probably one of the biggest challenges for those of us interested in the information space have. It's something I want to work on more. But yeah, we have to look at the connections beyond simply just one person. We have to look at the models of the internet and the models of profit and the wealthiest people have. Otherwise, I think we're just going to see the same problems continue.
The decentralized model of social media has been something that's widely discussed, never quite materialized, and
No.
every effort has turned out to be a moderated version that turned into some sort of a major security problem, like the Telegram or Matrix, like a space for drug dealers and
Mm.
organized criminals to enjoy protections from the authorities until it turns out that the entire thing was a farce. From the beginning, not secure at all, and just not
Yeah.
really centralized either, for that matter. So I'm wondering if there is an incentive really to design something truly decentralized. NAFO self-designed, but it's a movement. It's not a social media.
No. Yeah, this is something we need to be looking at. Now, some people would tell you that, well, this is what Web3 is meant to be, right? That's what the next iteration of the internet, which it's been quite an inconsistently used term, but generally people associate things like blockchain or crypto, oh, it's a decentralized space, truly anonymous, blah, 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 metaverses and whatever, like the next iteration. What I deeply worried about is, well, especially with the crypto connection, we'll see the same stuff. We're just going to see one elite buy this new internet space, let's say, and they're just going to be in control again. It's just going to be a continuation. The only truly decentralized internet was the very early internet, but how basic was it? It was incredibly basic. You couldn't do what you can do now. So it's kind of like just a consistently double-edged sword of the internet development. I think the problem is there isn't the incentive for the, the same, because the people who want a genuinely decentralized internet without huge corporate interests put first or government interference lack the resources that people like Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey or Zuckerberg or whoever else, Peter Thiel and these other tech bros who PayPal mafia as we call them, these people have the resources and they do create social media networks that people want. And I think you're doing it on a level that is truly anonymous or truly decentralized, that isn't going to be manipulated, is challenging. And I don't know, self fundraise social media, that just doesn't seem likely. It sounds lovely, but it is a challenge. I'm not sure what the answer is there. But I think we have to, I suppose it will start with just recognizing that this problem isn't going away. And if those of us who are interested and have the knowledge to do so can create a new model of social media, a new model of internet, then great. But I'm just worried it's going to be a long way away.
So that brings us back to the Russian campaigns, information campaigns, and how they have utilized this hybrid space to maximum effectiveness, using polarization, using social media algorithms, using egomaniacs in power to kind of mix facts and fiction and basically break down ideological barriers and infiltrate and corrupt the information space with conspiracy theories and elements that are increasingly mainstreamed among and leading to radicalization of perfectly average centrist people who were never really radical and who suddenly became started spouting bizarre
Yeah.
theories about about polio polio vaccines and
Yeah.
like that. So the question is, how do you see from the beginning of NATO and your involvement in the space in general, how have the Russian information campaigns evolved? Because I feel like they've been accelerating and proliferating a lot more than a few years ago, for instance.
Yeah, I would say I remember in like 2014, they were pretty good at just throwing a lot at the wall. Russian disinformation tends to work on the idea of not making you necessarily believe something, but at least making you doubt enough that you don't care, you feel apathetic. I do feel within the last year, what they've been quite successful at is exacerbating these pre-existing conditions within our other societies, let's say. So, promoting the far right in Germany or promoting Trump and things like that. A little bit more sneaky, looking like it's part of an organic movement. That's been quite a huge thing. At the day after the election, loads of us lost a lot of followers. Okay, some people just quit and went to blue sky, but there were a lot of bots that disappeared, right? And they were clearly manipulating the platform. So we have seen that's one example of a new growth. And the homegrown aspect, that's another, like the AstroTurf thing. Some of it's very obviously fake. And sometimes it's hilarious. I don't know how people fall for it, but people do apparently. So, um, but yeah, they are exacerbating these pre-existing problems in our society, anger at immigrants or anger at the government because of like inflation and COVID and stuff like that. COVID was a huge changing point, I think, as well, because a lot of people online, a lot of people at home, a lot of people felt anxious. They were impacted by something out of their control. Conspiracies made sense. Also, these are problems that go back well into media regulations in the USA. Go back quite a while. The YouTube, again, also the YouTube algorithm promoting these people who used to be very fringe because it's profitable. The normalization of these views. It would be too easy to just blame Russia, but Russia has hijacked that and used that to its advantage. And that's the thing that scares me, because a lot of people don't, some people, it's too easy to just blame Russia. We need to realize there are fundamental problems in our societies and try to fix them to stop Russia manipulating them. Um, but this, I've kind of lost my point a bit now, but I do think it has changed in these ways, and if we don't take the issues seriously that they are exacerbating, if we don't take the issue of perhaps regulating social media seriously, we're not going to really see it go anywhere. And it worries me that the people in charge of regulating social media, the people in charge of this in governments, just don't understand how it works. And yeah, so and we saw it with Trump. We saw people promoting, not even promoting Trump, but just disparaging Kamala and stuff like that. I mean, some of the criticisms were completely legitimate. I would say this, but it allowed for this sense of apathy, this lack of this demotivation. It allowed for Trump to win, and I'm worried we're going to see it again in Germany, and I'm worried with the elections, and I'm worried we're going to see it in France with Le Pen, and I'm worried we're going to see the same thing over and over again.
I mean, one obvious solution is just to nominate better leaders with better.
Yes, that would help. Yeah,
But leaving aside the top echelons of political power, what I'm seeing even be right below the top, head of state level, we are seeing the erasure of the differences between the far right, the far left. We are seeing that Trump's party is not really classical Republican in any way. You are seeing people like Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democratic presidential candidate, and RFK Jr., who, you don't get any more democratic than Kennedy.
yeah,
Yeah, and all of these people have something in common, which is a really mix of, authoritarian sympathies,
yeah,
bizarre health, bizarre social beliefs, proclivity towards conspiratorial mindset,
yeah.
and just really, a mishmash of behaviors that do not strictly fit into any kind of political box. So
Yeah.
that we are
I mean, with
facing a
Trump,
new phenomenon that's beyond the Democrat-Republican divide or the right-left divide.
it is this. It's amazing now to think of people like Mitt Romney and stuff like that as, or I miss those people, but that is the space we are in now, where I felt before, people with John McCain, there's a lot of legitimate criticisms. I've made them myself, but at least you felt they believed in certain core principles about democracy, about rule of law, about individual rights and stuff like that. And that has been eroded. I mean, Trump didn't come from nowhere. He is part of a wider problem, a hijacking of the Republican Party and uh, the information space, a lot of dodgy money coming in, Tea Party movement back in the day, and even stuff going back to Reagan's era.
But isn't it
But
to say that a lot of it was reactionary in reaction to the ratio of democratic notes and liberal norms within the Democratic Party, which also took on increasingly illiberal and authoritarian undertones in certain ways, which is kind of helped the other narrative and sort of a self-perpetuating cycles. You know,
I wouldn't agree with that, considering I think the Democrats have been incredibly milk toast. But maybe there has been somewhat of a authoritarian tendency because the only thing they've cared about is like social issues, and they don't even really help people. They don't actually even, they struggle to really, help the conditions for, a lot of minority people. I mean, they're better than Republicans, they're better than Trump, obviously, but they don't really help. But they at least they try to present themselves as caring
right.
about, minorities, trans people, things like that. But whether they've actually improved the conditions for these people is another question. And considering how far Trump's going with probably attacking a lot of these rights, it's hard to say if they did go far enough. But I think the Dems just failed to really change and offer anything inspiring. I think really since Obama, like Obama continued a lot of the stuff from Bush era, but he at least was inspiring when he came in. He could do that. Biden obviously did quite well, but I think just Trump's first term was so bad. I think that helped him a lot. And I just don't think this recent campaign was good. I think that the Dems just failed to motivate their base and they failed to be effective. But Trump's rise, yeah, it's the rise of these unreasonable people across the spectrum who don't believe in these core concepts. And yeah, they are backed by people with a lot of money because they know that they're going to protect the interests of the ultra wealthy. Foreign parties, Russia and Saudi Arabia and stuff want that as well because Trump's very easily manipulatable. This is a worrying trend we've seen in the US, but and I don't know. I'm worried about the future, and I'm worried about now Trump. He hasn't got those guardrails he had. I had this conversation on our podcast a couple of weeks ago. Nick Ford said to me, Trump hasn't got the guardrails that there were before, like last time, and that is quite worrying. Although the thing
Quite
is with Trump,
deliberate,
he's
by
very
the way.
unreliable.
And so I find the most ironic thing about the situation is that actually the many people are getting exactly what they claim they want. They were complaining about the sharp differences between the parties. Those differences are going because we are seeing this strange mixture of assorted political interests who would normally have never been found in the same room together joining the hand. So people wanted a unity government, they're getting it. People were complaining about big tech being controlled by the government and manipulated. Now the big tech is controlling the government, or at least joining the government, becoming this technocratic force within the government. So if people really cared about the separation about two media, they're certainly not objecting to it now. For
Yeah.
many, and frankly, a lot of them are democratic donors and are seen as pro-democratic. You're seeing Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and
Yeah.
all these people who are traditionally viewed as democratic oriented. So you have this political erasure, you have this tech government erasure going in the other direction, and the same people who claim they were against all of these things or who claim to be, wanting some other version of these things are happily satisfied with this and are not complaining about any of this happening. And so my question is to you, if all of this is changing the society and not just these particular, parties or government, if they're changing the way people even think in general of all backgrounds about what is the quote unquote new normal, to use everyone's favorite COVID term, can we really reverse the direction? Is it democratic to do so if this is what people are democratically choosing?
Yeah, it's I mean that's a classic challenge of where does democracy end and rights begin? And I would argue there is a case that there are certain rights and norms which should be protected, and if we allow for the erosion of that, even on the basis of democratic votes, I think that is entering into a tyrannical situation. It's It's fast. I think the fundamental problem is it's just a lot of things have come to a head that have been brewing in our societies for a long time with the dominance of an elite, of these elites, the tech people, but also just others. And they've just risen to the top here, and it's been relatively unconstrained. And they have, especially in the US, a lot of private donations. That's a really big problem, I think, in how governments can be influenced by these people who then influence society. It's like the government and the state are very intertwined, despite all this assurances of a very capitalist society. Even if you were the most hardcore libertarian, that should worry you. And I think it's just I don't know if it's reversible without some very wider systemic change. Effectively, I think we and this is again I've come back again to I think the Dems and a lot of the centre left people who I should be on their side aren't talking to that. They're just hoping that, oh well, we'll just change this guy and it will be fine. It's like, no, this was always going to happen. You just didn't challenge it. No one's challenging it. No one's realizing it. And I think some people are scared to criticize it because it makes them sound like a communist or whatever. It's like, no, like it doesn't have to be that way. You need some regulations. You need some like high taxation on these billionaires. You need to cut their influence, stop private donations. These are the achievable ways of limiting these people's power.
Here's the
Um,
problem, though. First of all, billionaires have found ways of evading high taxes for decades. They have the
yeah,
means that average people do not. You have offshore accounts, you have this, that, and the other thing. Second, even political donations, quite frankly, are now avoidable. How do all these foreign influenced, politicians get away with it, except for, Menendez, who purchased gold blocks? They use other means. They use, you know if not outright campaign donations, which also have their limits. They use PACs. You start banning PACs, you start getting bribes through some other means. Nothing is stopping people from having accounts somewhere else that they can capitalize on after they retire after a few years. There's always means to evading that. So I don't know uh, that just limiting is in itself just the answer, but we are also seeing surprising lack of interest in the people who are very obviously flouting the law. I can't imagine that someone like Jackson Hinkle would travel to Moscow, Venezuela for free. He's getting,
no, right.
you know, donations from somewhere. Someone like Santos clearly didn't have the money to run his first congressional campaign. Where is that money coming from? Why is no one looking? Everyone's looking at his lies and his bullshit. No one is looking at his campaign. Speaker Johnson, and his dubious financial dealings. Everyone's talking about his, political problems, but no one is talking about his obvious financial, dark hole, and you could say the same thing for many other people. So this financial lack of disinterest, bipartisan disinterest, it seems to me astounding. Everyone's talking about Russian narratives, but no one is looking at the funding of these narratives and how they translate into
Yeah,
action. And
yeah. The Tim Pool thing, his podcast getting like insane amounts of money, and there's going to be loads of these people who are actually, there is a very big financial aspect to Russian disinformation. I haven't really touched on it. People don't realize how much money is coming in, and that is a challenge because they're not. It's not as simple as we're seeing checks from from the Kremlin. No, they use shells, and within shells, it's passed on. Tim didn't even know it was coming from Russia, which is hilarious.
I find it
But
hard to believe that somebody could hear the narratives that they're spouting and not think that there could potentially be some Russian related interest in that, and ask a very reasonable question at that point. From a legal standpoint, I would describe it as willful blindness rather than real ignorance.
yeah. But I think there is an element of one way to also challenge this information is to just cut off this money supply. How you do that? That's a big question because that even with sanctions, these people can jump around them. We see how they can do that. I mean, I'm not saying sanctions aren't useful. They are. They're clearly affecting Russia right now. But we do. They will find ways around it. We need to really look at how to challenge this flow of money, really. And I think we're not. We need to take that seriously.
So, given that Russia seems to be accomplishing a lot of what it has in mind, chaos, we've got it. the destruction of the political system and of the parties, traditional parties, we've got it. Capitalizing on corruption and greed, we've got it. Crazy conspiracy theories floating around and doubt and distrust in authorities, it's all there. Where does it go from here? I mean, what else do they even need to do anything else on top of what's already been accomplished? Is there a direction you foresee the Russian influence campaigns and information campaigns going? Because some of the conspiracy theories there with lizard people are outright from science fiction, and yet some people actually believe in that.
Yeah, it's funny how I wanted to bring this up earlier. Some of the theories I remember when I was like first discovering the internet, some of these theories that used to be like just funny are now like mainstream. I'm like, I never thought that. I didn't think anything of it when I watched videos about lizard people and stuff like that. And now apparently it's sincerely held beliefs. Um, yeah, what's next? I mean, I suppose it depends a bit what happens in different countries. I think their main goal will be they're going to hit a lot of European stuff, and I think Musk is a good weather vane here because he's already promoting the AFD. So we're going to get a lot of promotion of far right actors in Europe, I think, to cause chaos, and a lot of Ukraine actors. We'll see some more physical acts of violence or drone spying, things like that. I do think this might happen. I don't know what their end goal will be. I think they've achieved a lot that they wanted in America, but although on the other hand, there is still this, Trump's quite unreliable, and I have no idea exactly whether Russia will get. I don't think Russia is going to be that successful in the next in 2025. I think there's a lot of problems heading its way economically, so I think we might see some shifts there. And if there are negotiations, I don't think Russia's going to be in the position of strength it wants to be for this reason. But I am worried that their goal is to have like a weakened, chaotic Europe and West, effectively, right? And it can appear close. I think there will be some sort of counter reaction. I think there will be some correction at some point. Maybe not in the States, maybe not soon, but I do think these things tend to go ebb and flow. I do have faith in a lot of people will do the right thing, but it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of energy, and change at a lot of levels to tackle these issues that Russia is exacerbating already. I think I keep coming back to this point because I think it's really important. I just, but yeah, I don't know. I think in the US they have achieved a lot, but the US is also they planted these seeds. Trump isn't a Russian creation. All these people didn't come out of nowhere. They are very much a uniquely American problem too. And America needs to look at itself and think, how the hell did we get here? How do we have basically a guy who wants to be a dictator as our president? There's a lot of issues that countries need to really soul search in and not just blame Russia. Yeah, Russia is helping, but it's not the cause of all these problems.
Soul searching, if the soul searchers are the ones who either failed to contain it or actively promoted it to begin with, then
Oh
who
yeah.
is the soul searching should be by, given that everybody seems to be sort of a part of the problem, either by passivity and ignorance, and or
Yeah.
by active participation in the creation of these conditions. I see a few politicians moving away from, oh, well, we shouldn't have denuclearized Ukraine. That's fine. They admit it like over a decade later when
Yeah.
it's late. But I don't see too many people admitting anything regarding information space or,
No.
for trust with their constituents or how to rebuild the trust. I haven't seen any admission in that regard by anyone.
No, I think that, and this is a problem with the institutions, especially like the Democratic Party. Like they were doing really well in the election when they were just calling the MAGA lot weird. That was actually a brilliant. And then some advisor said, like, don't do that. And then it dropped. They should have just been calling them weird. That would have been a very NAFO method to say, you guys are weird, weirdos. That was brilliant because they hated that because it didn't make them look scary. It made them look weak. And then they changed their mind. Are they just not? Who is it? Pelosi just like snubbed AOC for some position. I forgot what the position. We are seeing these older people. I think we're very out of touch with the average American, and it's not just in the. I am talking about the US here, but it's also in other countries. The people need to do the soul searching. Yeah, I guess these people probably they're not going to. We shouldn't rely on them to. Those of us who do actually believe in things like democracy, who want rights, who want to see real change, who take this threat of information warfare seriously, I don't know whether it's better to either try to get involved in these institutions and see a positive change, or whether it's better just to burn it all down and start again sometimes. I go back and forth on this. I'm just worried that the latter is just, it's the same issue with the social media thing, right? When you're an outsider, your resources are limited. So I don't know if it's better to try to steer the ship within, even if it's all kind of compromise at this point, or whether it would be better just to try to start again. I do believe that people have capacity for change in organization, though, when they want to do it. You've seen it. I sounded very pessimistic today, but I still think that people can do the right thing when they want to, and they can coordinate and come together. I think this is why, coming back full circle, I like NAFO, because I do see people on a grassroots level coming around a good cause. We need to take this energy and approach to these institutions, to these issues. Otherwise, we're just going to see the same thing. So yeah, I don't know. These bodies, these institutions are struggling to soul search, and they're going to struggle to make the changes, especially while it's run by these people who come from an entirely different era, I think, basically.
I'm not entirely sure empowering people like AOC will not actually exacerbate the problem, given that AOC is part of that extreme populist trend. That's not to say that all younger politicians are like that. Quite on the contrary, I see actually a very interesting battle between the AOC types in Congress and the Ricky Torres types, who is socially liberal, but who is, unlike AOC, is actually quite popular with his own constituency in the sense of actual practical deliverables on
Mm.
combating the drug epidemic and the drug, markets in the Bronx, but at the same time countering authoritarianism very vigorously where AOC is not. She has actually vocally sided with various authoritarian regimes and foreign policy issues, which is what gives people like Pelosi pause. Not that I'm a big fan of Pelosi either for entirely different reasons, but Pelosi did at least have the interest in confronting China and in confronting Taiwan, even as her party is, at least with visibility. So even though you can talk about a lot about how both parties have essentially married the Chinese Communist Party investments in the United
Yeah.
States, from the economic perspective, the messaging has been mixed at best and quite contradictory. But we're seeing this trend. We're seeing that there are anti-authoritarian voices, but the tendency is to look at any young politician, even if they're part of the problem, say, "Oh, well, it's just a generational problem." I'm not sure it's a generational problem. I think it's a problem of being pro-authoritarian versus pro-liberal in the classical sense of it. And I'm not entirely sure that people know the difference at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there has been a shift away from liberal values in the, not in a very broad, in a very like simple sense of liberal democracy, right? A rights-based, rule of law-based society where the government should represent all people in some way, the most narrowest sense of liberalism, you could say. I do think we've lost that to an extent. And I think part of it is actually what you said about the compromise via money, the desire to just focus on trade and growth at the expense of, values. Whether it's been Europe trading with Russia for the gas, even when the war was going on. You could have made a case, I suppose, in the early 2000s that, well, if we trade more with Russia, we'll integrate and it'll be better. We kind of halved it with gas, and then we just depended on them, which was also which is a very bad approach. But I'm saying you could at least make that case. And I think in the US, the same issue with China. Obviously, a lot of politicians like to blame China for this, that, and the other, sometimes in a very problematic way. But at the same time, they don't take it seriously when China is threatening its own citizens, spying on them, the people in the camps, the Uyghurs, threatening, interfering in Hong Kong, threatening Taiwan, Vietnam, Philippines. They're quite sort of like soft on this, and I think a lot of it is because they want that money and they want that trade and they've got that interest, and a lot of them believe in authoritarianism, and this is a problem. We those of us, and I think yeah, it's not just generational. I think, in a way, the political discourse has become too technocratic. We've forgotten to talk about in ideological terms. We've forgotten to stand up for values. We focus more on small problems, small tweaking, fixing, technocratic approach. Just fixing around the edges, especially in the center left, I would say. Trump and that lot, and AFD and Le Pen, they are a rejection of that, but in the complete opposite direction to what I, as a liberal, would want, right? Because they want to burn it all down and be like technical, like rulers for everyone. But they at least are challenging this technocratic bubble, and I think that is part of their success. And those of us who value this, we also need to reject that bubble, I think, but put forward a positive case for liberal values, for democracy, for anti-authoritarianism. Otherwise, we're just going to struggle.
Just that this anti-authoritarian case is being made in ways that are quite frankly not very effective in many
No.
ways, and very subpar, very just
Inconsistently as well, I'd say.
consistent, and also lacking the vigor and the energy that the other side seems to have. And I'm not entirely sure whether some of the defenders of this order even believe what they're saying, judging from
No.
their lackluster comments. And that brings me to the point that you just touched on, but I think is exceptionally important, and in my view as a lawyer, quite alarming, which is the rule of law, which seems to be deteriorating precipitously from massive pardons that open doors from even more massive pardons under Trump to this bipartisan willingness to overlook outright illegal conduct within their own political ranks under the guise of alleged persecution by the other side, to this increased in preference for loyalism, and loyalism as opposed to actual real loyalty, because I don't believe any of these people are actually loyal to each other. They're networks of blackmailers, as far as I see. Their loyalty is based on mutually assured destruction, not on any principles. Um, so loyalism over any sort of legitimacy, credibility, any sort of constitutionalism in the U.S. sense. Elsewhere just following the rule or whatever country they're in. So we are seeing the erasure of all of this, and I think under Trump, given the makeup of his current cabinet nominees and what happened to Matt Gaetz, who's getting his own show
Yeah.
after just being lambasted by the House ethics reports, and that's Republicans lambasting him. This is not some liberal conspiracy against him,
Yeah.
clearly.
No.
So my question is, where do you see all of this is going? Because my concern that the basic rule of law is going to, and we've seen this during with both sides during COVID. We've had these violent protests, allegedly pro human rights, but reality, a lot of these people were just basically looting and marauding and had nothing to do with helping anybody. It didn't build anything. It didn't, it didn't get more justice for anyone. We are seeing the same thing from the Republican side in the sense of assorted, rights and corruption and excuses for corruption and violations. So where is it all heading? Are we heading for anarchy? Are we heading for managed anarchy? Are we heading for some chaotic, self-promoting kleptocracy of technocrats? What
I,
is the
I mean,
direction?
the danger, a lot of authoritarian regimes aren't from the, you know this, I'm sure you know, but I think a lot of people would mistake that authoritarianism doesn't come from the use of the law, it's the absence of law, right? It's when you can manipulate the systems, there is no process, there is no accountability, that's the danger. And that's what I'm worried we're going to see in the United States. I'm worried that the UK as well could go this path. The Conservative government did a lot of this stuff, about like making protests very difficult, people getting arrested for like peaceful protests. I think that's really problematic, and this makes people want to protest more violently. And I actually have some sympathy for that. So I can understand that like anger. And what I'm worried is then, even though we've got a Labour government now, they seem to be continuing a lot of this stuff. I'm worried we're going to see this. I'm worried that basically in Western countries we have set up a very easy way for the government to abuse the power it does have while corroding the rule of law and effectively having very authoritarian regimes. It's complete like backslide. I mean, the US is a backsliding example. If we were talking about the conditions of the USA in the context of Eastern Europe or Central Asia, we'd be going, this is democratic backsliding, reversion away from democracy. But because the USA, we don't use those terms. We skirt around the issue, which is, I think, really stupid. We should be honest. I think Trump is a fascist, and I think the government is is a deeply authoritarian one. And I'm worried about this. I think, yeah, I think the US, I think, honestly, I think it's in a bad situation. I don't know what's going to happen next. I think it will be in a form of authoritarianism with a breakdown in law and order and a concentration of power in effectively Trump and his cabinet and the a business elite, effectively. I hope to God in other countries that we at least look at this and try to avoid this thing. But it comes back to the same problem that, again, a lot of these centrist institutions, we're very technocratically minded in Europe, and I think we're also risking the same challenge. I'm hoping that at least some people can wake up to this and realize this and try to put forth some positive case for some change before it gets too late. And again, I do believe people can have that. It's just that it has to start with conversations. It has to start with some direct actions. Otherwise, it's going to be too little too late. Very optimistic worldview, yes.
There's a lot of talk about leadership crisis around the world, certainly in the West, but I'm not sure that it's as much as a leadership crisis in democratic countries as a social crisis, because good leaders come from the people who demand good leadership. And if you don't know what
Yeah.
good leadership is, and you don't know what you stand for, and you don't even know what a good governance is supposed to look like, you are not going to elect good leaders. You're not going to even demand good leaders. You will imagine that what you're seeing now is the best that you can get, because at least you're slightly better off than whatever you imagine the other side is doing. So we've had that for quite a long time. It's been deteriorating, and I think there's been an, first of all, wide public ignorance, at least in the US, of basic constitutional principles, basic
Yeah.
historical principles, basic economic principles. On the other hand, you've also had a lot of this, brainwashing, indoctrination, superficial kind of gravitation to emotional narratives rather than fact-based narratives. And we've got to a place where, where once charisma was just part of the makeup of a good leader, now it's the only essential element, and nobody cares about,
Yeah.
competence anymore, or principles, or the networks that the so-called leader is surrounded by. So the question is, if the problem is not really leadership per se, but the society that no longer is educated enough to really understand its own responsibilities and its own role in democratic governance, then it cannot possibly resolve its own problem. If by and large most of the public is kind of uh really this in this mental bubble that it cannot break out of, it may be too late to really effectively fix anything. We have seen failed states and how they go down that path of ending up with bad factions in power, bad the elections, electing corrupt and mismanaged, self-interested parties and leaders. Lebanon is a great example. And we may very certainly have a lot more capital and a more diverse population than Lebanon, and and we haven't been colonized by anybody, but our minds are being colonized. So the question is, is it a problem that's even resolvable at this point? Is authoritarianism and these chaotic narratives bound to win simply because this has been actually a problem decades in the making, and most people don't even have the inclination to question what they're seeing.
I don't think anything is ever inevitable. However, I think it is a difficult challenge because you say yourself, people aren't educated a lot of the time, and that's been a deliberate policy choice of various governments around how we teach education, how you teach. I think in the states you call it civics, right, or whatever you. Um, so we see these issues that we see the use of the social media, and before that, I suppose television, the way it's presented politics to people has been a problem, and the rise of clickbait and disinformation, all that stuff we've already touched on. I think I'm not surprised any of this happened. I don't think anyone should be that surprised, but I do think it's it's resolvable, but it will require a widespread societal awareness and change, because otherwise, I think, I don't have faith in many of the institutions at this moment, especially in the US context. I mean, again, I'm not a US citizen, so, and it's not my expertise, but I don't see a willingness to engage with the people who are left behind. I, and because of that, normal people aren't interested in joining these institutions and putting forth positive leaders. Who are becoming the leaders? They're like politicians, policy wonks, same privileged people who are out of touch with the average American. And it's the same thing in the UK. We're getting people who tended to go to universities. Okay, the now new government cabinet is better on this one, but it's still a big problem in that a lot of these people, they went to university, they studied to become a politician, they became a politician. They didn't have much life experience. They don't have always the best ability to speak to the average person. And then that makes people not want to join the parties, right? Because they think, well, that's not for me, and I don't feel involved, and I feel powerless. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised we don't see the leadership we deserve. At the same time, the institutions seem to be set up, and the domination of money and the elites and all this stuff who want to hear the people that they like, not the people who might actually make change. They're not getting the funding. So I don't know, and there's just this horrific like storm of factors, like a perfect storm of all these factors and different angles. Do I think it's inevitable again? No. I think there's always capacity for change. I'm just worried it will happen either not necessarily too late, but things are going to have to get really bad before people actually do something. I think a lot of people are going to sit back in the US and be like, well, I've voted, there's not much I can do. That's a bad approach. And I'm worried that's how a lot of people think democracy is. Whereas democracy is stuff you do every day. It should be something you do every day, right?
So that brings me back to the issue of navel and humor, because a lot of illiberals, whether or not they're in power or just supporters of the people in power, tend to lack humor. That's a historical
Yes.
fact. So Stalin, Kim Jong-un, and all these people are not known for, for great ability at self-awareness, much less self-deprecating humor of any sort. And in some ways, Trump is an exception because he can be occasionally funny, but not necessarily the people around him, and and a lot of them certainly don't appreciate being mocked or challenged in any way. So the question is, how do we kind of break through, kind of utilize? Is there a way for NATO and its supporters to utilize humor to expose social liberalism, not just Russia and its campaigns, but actually the deterioration of these democratic notes, the lack of humor, and kind of poking fun at all the contributors, all the humorless scolds in our midst, and kind of make it more of an even more social phenomena that can actually force people to into a sense of self-awareness. Because right now I'm seeing a lot of defensiveness, a lot of very defensive victim mentality that forces people into corners people into mistaking that these personalities and the issues that they represent are not the same thing, and that nobody, people who can't stop and look at themselves, are not really. You have to ask why can they laugh at themselves in a way that or at their own, or find fault with anything they're doing. We've turned these cults of personalities into defending largely what the person stands for, and being sort of humane, into also kind of worshiping and not being able to take issue with anything that's done. And there's got to be a fine line. There's got to be a fine line between humor and insult, and there's also got to be a fine line between this vigorous defense of one's issues and positions and ability to criticize and ask questions and draw barriers, draw lines. So where can NATO help with that? How do you see this next battle? Because I think it's far beyond Russia, and I think even helping
Yeah.
Ukraine requires looking at the big picture, not just Russia. Russia is not a militarily strong power. It's got a lot of supporters, but at the end of the day, it's a very weak link, and the biggest link is not any one regime as I see it, but this
It's authoritarian.
quasi-authoritarian illiberal mentality that's overtaking everything.
Yeah, I don't entirely disagree with this. That it is a rise in authoritarians across the world, and that's been going on a long time. Yeah, and I think we did see this. A lot of people in NATO were trying to fight Trump stuff, MAGA stuff, especially. Um, I think it threw some people because a lot of us are not from the US. Some of us felt, well, if we post too much about it, it looks like we're
Yeah.
trying to threaten people. But I was very much like, no, we should, because this will directly impact Ukraine. I think that and the core values of NATO, I think, are in a sense liberal, in a very narrow sense liberal, but I think they are. We tend to believe in democracy and individual rights at the basic level. If that's not liberal, I don't really know what is. Um, so and that's why, as I think many people who would call themselves conservatives or socialists or libertarians within NATO do, I would say yes, but you are within the confines of liberalism. You're not an authoritarian, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think this is something, and as you asked earlier, like what is the future? Yeah, and this would be part of the fight, fighting authoritarians in Europe, in the USA, fighting this argument. It is probably the main challenge for NATO and anyone, even not in NATO, but at least who are against what they're seeing in the world, this rise of authoritarian, the far right or far left or whatever. We have to realize that this is a global fight, this is a global struggle, and it doesn't necessarily mean defending everything about our contemporary capitalistic society, because no, that's a mistake. I think that we don't want to make those mistakes. We do need to realize there's problems with our society, but the answer is not these authoritarians. We need to fight them, otherwise they're not going to make it better, they're going to make it worse. So we need to fight them, and I think make a positive case for change in our own ways, probably. um, that is something I do want to do. That's why I support taking on the MAGA people. I support taking on the AFD people, the Le Pen people, the Brexit Party people. Oh, sorry, what are they called now? Reform UK. Sorry, all
Action
these people.
proactive, yes, yeah.
Yeah, these people, because they are authoritarians, and if we let them be unchecked, then we're seeing where that goes. We've seen where it goes, and we will see where it goes in the next few years. And yeah, we do have to fight these people. They are interconnected, and a lot of people are. And I think that will be the next fight, probably. Whether it's all under the name of NATO, that's another question, so that remains to be seen. But I think a lot of us are like-minded enough that we will continue fighting in that direction.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the movement is a movement, but the methods are what matters. The methods
Yeah.
of exposing this obsessive, self-interested groups. And here's the problem: a lot of people genuinely believe that Elon Musk is there to defend free speech, and they genuinely believe that Trump is there to defend the common man. They still stand for the right issues. They're just wrong about what they're seeing, about how they don't have the information, or they have blind spots, or for whatever reason, they're entirely misinterpreting what's actually happening. But they do genuinely, in core principle, want those things. They just are going for the wrong delivery mechanism. And the question is, how do you kind of expose that what they want to is correct, is that the delivery mechanisms they're going is taking them, in the wrong direction from what they actually want.
So how to expose them to the reality? Is that sort of what
Yes,
you
how
mean?
to see them that they are not actually getting what they think they're getting.
Yeah,
It's not because all of these people are supporters of authoritarianism, because from
right.
what I see, a lot of them are not. They actually do not want authoritarianism. They're just wrong about what they're seeing. They don't see Musk as being fundamentally biased and attached to illiberal agendas, for instance. They think he's a great answer to the prior problems with X and social media. They just are wrong about the facts, not about what they want.
Yeah, and I think how to do it is to just show that these people are not, they are not men of the people, they are elitists, and to show that. And some people go, oh, but okay, he's got money, like Trump's got money, but he's honest, he tells it like it is.
Yeah, very
That is a classic view, and I guess it says something about the state of our politics, where that's seen as good, with that sort of rhetoric, which I don't know what planet they live on, because to me he sounds like an incoherent dementia patient. I don't know how he tells it like he is, but okay. Um, I guess it's how it's presented on their media as well, maybe compared to
sure.
what I consume. But yeah, it's showing that these people are effectively, they are criminals and they are not who you think they are. You have to expose their reality, like the fact Nigel Farage, he does the same thing. Oh, he always has a pint and a cigarette in his hand. He tries to look like a man at the pub, even though he's a multimillionaire banker, right? He's not, we have to like show this, show that they're hypocrites too. Elon Musk is a South African born, illegally immigrated, and these people who support, like, building the wall and stuff like that are venerating him. That's hypocrisy on their part. I mean, I have nothing wrong with people being immigrants or whatever, but yeah, it just goes against everything they do. Donald Trump is a criminal. He is not a fan of like law and being strong. He's a criminal and he stole from charities and all this stuff. There's so much stuff you can show. You have to show that these people have no clothes and that they are not strong. You have to mock them because they are weak people and they're insecure people. They do not respond well to criticism. And I don't know, you have to show the corruption, you have to show the hypocrisy, but you have to do it in direct, simple messages that resonate with people rather than big, lengthy think pieces in the New York Times that no one's going to read. That's, I think, part of the problem that I think the Democrats have had. And that's why I think NAFO is stronger in that regard, because you have to just images, memes, because that was what Trump and the MAGA people had. They worked out, they did well with that. They knew mock, have memes, images. It's emotional. Even if you maybe subconsciously you go, I don't agree with that. Subconsciously, it appeals to some people, and they see the same message enough. Musk protects free speech. They might internalize that. Yeah, we have to show no, he doesn't. He actually bans this freedom of speech. He doesn't support this. He supports Saudi Arabia. He supports these places which are very repressive. He did stuff with for the Turkish government. He to like ban the opposition there, right?
Does not support any reformers in Saudi Arabia or the young people in Saudi Arabia or the people who've tried to do anything good. He took money from the worst of the worst in Saudi Arabia, people aligning themselves with authoritarian extremist movements and who are quite frankly tied to 9/11 and things like that. So just to
Yeah,
be clear, well, I want to be clear. There's a lot of people in Saudi who are more pro-American than Elon Musk. I'm serious. But
yeah,
he's not with those people.
yeah, yeah,
And unfortunately, this agenda of deceptive agenda of having these self-interested power players present themselves as caring about the American people or some other people somewhere. This is just, this is tragic because I think people do want somebody who is actually pro-American, who will be a strong leader. They're just
yeah,
wrong on how it should look like because they've
yeah,
been so long accustomed to the erasure of these basic concepts of what being law-abiding and consistent and unhypocritical looks like. They've been so long accustomed to this erasure of these principles that they can't recognize things for what they actually are in practice. And I think that is the challenge that we are facing really.
I think so too. Yeah, I, I think it's bizarre. Like, for example, the people that voted for Trump the first and then Biden the second, and then Trump again. I don't know. I feel people's memories have gone so short. I don't know what. I feel that people live in such a different reality to each other, even, and we've lost sight of what things were like even 10, 20 years ago, whatever. And I think it's easy to forget. especially with the constant bombardment of news information, I think this is part of the problem as well, and just how we fundamentally perceive reality now with social media and constant. You know, you can look at your phone, and in a few seconds, you can see anything. It's almost relentless, and I think it's easy to forget how things were not that long ago. You know, I watched you know, you can find like clips of Reagan and Bush in the 80s, Republicans, hardcore right-wing Republicans defending immigration. Now that would be called like highly left-wing in the United States. It's like, what has happened? Like, just the goalposts have shifted so much. You know, but these people look
You-
left-wing.
An even more jarring example than that, because you can always argue about red lines in immigration and where, and I think there's always been, I don't think Reagan would have been in favor of completely unvetted millions of illegal immigrants with no, infrastructure to
Right.
support them. I don't think he would have supported that. But I'll give you an example that is so stark and that no one can argue with it really in good faith. Tucker Carlson coming out and painting Zelensky and Churchill being villains of history, and some of his guests doing that, and he agreeing with them and specifically platforming such people. Now, I don't think majority of people currently support Tucker Carlson or this concept that Churchill is a villain. But these versions, diluted versions of that same idea, are being propagated very actively. So that is being increasingly normalized with more people than they would have been 10 years ago. Not the majority, not even close to it, but more than
Yeah.
previously. And if you at this point, barely know what the Holocaust was, simply not because you're, a hardcore anti-Semite, but because you're just that ignorant, then it may not be that difficult to convince you that Churchill may have done things that, go against our core defense of peace. You can turn black into white quite easily if people are really
Yeah.
that uneducated and open, and if you play with the words enough. So something
Yeah.
that would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, today is increasingly part of somebody who is bringing in, all these politicians who themselves were harsh critics, if not worse, of Trump, and who, for opportunistic reasons, are now joining the cabinet. You know, and Tucker and his ilk are behind all of this. You have people like Candace Owens, who was a nobody who converted to Catholicism, who has probably have more Catholic education than she does, going around, uncovering, bringing to light exceptional obscure conspiracy theories about religion and saying that Nazis were Christians, whereas Nazis took over the churches in Germany and persecuted Christians. And we all know how Bonhoeffer ended up, and people don't seem to remember any of that. And Catholics too did not suffer good good fate under Nazis. The fact is, the level of ignorance is so deep that these sort of extremely cheap, shallow shots actually managed to resonate with people who only understand the echoes of history. So this is something that is extremely disturbing to me, because these are such extreme examples, yet are being taken seriously enough to not be immediately shut down.
Yeah. It's this theme again, which I've touched on a few times. You know, this erosion of commonality, but it's not even it's shared reality as well. It's a shared understanding of historical reality. You know, there are legitimate criticisms of Churchill, right, as a person and some of his views and some of the things he suggested doing, but clearly fighting the Nazi is good. It's not something we should ever have to debate again. And that's a scary. Yeah, it is scary how these views are just coming back, and I just feel like history is coming in circles sometimes, and it is quite terrifying. I don't know.
On that somber note, I think we have to keep in mind what we are fighting against, because this sort of thing, completely absurd thing that we laugh at today, can become part of a
Yeah.
normal discourse tomorrow. This sort of extreme example may be limited to Tucker and his ill-begotten guests today, but in a few days, they could be suggested to one of the candidates that he pushed into Trump's cabinet, and that person can say something quintessentially stupid that will be picked up by the media and circulated. So, this
Yeah.
is, it's we should be aware of, we should be mocking some of it, but at the same time, we also have to ask ourselves more serious questions. How did it get to be to that point, how do we undo the damage? How do we make history and education and real values more appealing than, essentially all salesmanship of bad ideas?
Yeah, I think it comes back to this point that a lot of it's a problem I have with expertise in general. I would say I see a lot on Twitter. I've seen it a lot with Ukraine stuff, but I think it's the same with history, with society, with politics. A lot of the best people, I would say, the best experts aren't necessarily the best at communicating to a wide audience, and this has left a vacuum for grifters on all sides because there are some people on the pro-Ukraine side who have a lot of likes, a lot of followers. I don't like because they oversimplify things, and that annoys me. Or they don't actually do anything, or they make mistakes and whatever. And like, it's generally not harmful too much, but it's still I would prefer something different. That being said, and it's even worse because when you haven't got these actual truth getting out there, it's easy for these grifters, people without qualifications or experience to know, or people, or worse than that, people who are being funded and managed by authoritarian actors, whether at home or abroad, whatever. It's easy, and so those of us who do care about history, about liberalism, democracy, we need to learn to express things concisely and easily, not necessarily dumbed down. It can still be nuanced. I don't think we should talk down to people, but at the same time, if your only output of information is through dense academic articles behind a paywall or lengthy think pieces, you're never going to get through to people.
Sure.
And it allows people to spread myths about the Holocaust, about the Holodomor, about the Soviet Union, about whatever. It's very easy to do that. And these things are good. They're simple, and conspiracies make people feel good. And so because it makes them feel they know something secret. And we need to really fight that. And it does involve going onto the information space, yes, taking it seriously, but taking the threat seriously, but doing like humorous and simple and easy messaging. Otherwise, you're just gonna not be listened to.
I think that is a great point, and I think this is something worth exploring in the future and actually really discussing and implementing too as well. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone listening to will kind of think about these things. Just next time you go online and see a cute dog, maybe there is more behind it than just a picture, and take a look and engage if you want. And we'll be back, of course, next week, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. The Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thank you, Joe, for this enlightening discussion, and thank you for clarifying things that people may have heard of about somewhere but don't really know. I think it's very valuable. And
Yes,
best of luck with everything, and have a great evening. And to everyone who's been watching, have a great evening as well.
thank you for having me. It was nice talking to you. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.